Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Robust Opposition. I'm very pleased to have with me my guest, Kim Roney, who is a current Asheville City Council member running for mayor. But before I bring her in, I want to just explain to people who've been watching my shows and some comments I've been getting on various Facebook posts, why aren't I interviewing Republicans? And the answer is I'm a progressive and I do what is called advocacy journalism. And if you've never heard of it, you can Google it. So I just try to support and promote people who are on the same side of the issues that I am. No one pays me for this work. I'm not a reporter at the Citizen Times or WLOS. I do not feign objectivity. I am definitely progressive. I was a Bernie Sanders supporter and delegate. So I do my show, as I say, no one pays me. I do it as a labor of love. And therefore, I want to have conversations with people whose policies I support. So now, with no further ado, I'm bringing in my guest, Kim Roney. How are you doing tonight, Kim?
Good evening. Glad to be here with you.
You doing well?
Indeed, yes. Just finished teaching piano lessons for the afternoon.
Awesome. Well, as you know, and as viewers who have been seeing my candidate interviews know, the way I do this show is I ask you to talk about your background, where you're from, where you went to school, what your professional background is, how long you've lived in Asheville, and then I get into more of the issues. So let's start with that. Tell us all about yourself, Kim.
Sure. So I'm the oldest of 8 kids, born and raised in rural South Carolina. I attended James Madison University, where I studied music industry. So a combination of business classes and music classes. What else? You mentioned how long I've lived in Asheville. My partner and I moved to Asheville in 2006. We helped to open up Harvest Records here in West Asheville. I've known Matt and Mark since high school. And I am a former service industry worker. I've worked in a number of restaurants, and I've worked minimum wage hotel industry jobs in this town. My family history, though, goes back here to the late 1800s when my great-great-grandparents lived here. My great-grandmother was born in Kenilworth when my great-great-grandparents were working with the indigenous people of the mountains here. And I'm a piano teacher. I currently work with 36 students and their families across 12 different schools in Asheville and Buncombe County. This is my 22nd year of teaching piano. The same time I started teaching piano, I also started working in community radio. So I also have 22 years of community radio production experience. I'm a founding member of 103.3 Asheville FM, where I served as the station manager, which is essentially the executive director of the nonprofit, running the daily operations, overseeing the budget, and with over 100 volunteers. So I have nonprofit executive director experience. I'm a small business owner and music educator, and I currently serve on Asheville City Council.
Well, we have that background in common. I was a program director for a small community cable television channel in Lexington, Mass. In the early 80s, and then in Beverly Hills, California, executive director of something called the Beverly Hills Community Access Corporation, and we programmed the public access channel for that city. So how did you get involved in public service? What motivated you to get involved, and what were some of the early involvements that you had?
Well, I have done voter advocacy work for the past couple of decades, just making sure that by informing myself as a voter and sharing information with fellow voters to encourage my peers and my neighbors to get out to the polls. I would say that my interest and desire to serve in politics came from that community radio background. In 2014, I was the producer of the AFM News Hour covering local news on the radio, and we were hosting a podcast called Get Your Gourd On with then Councilmember Gordon Smith. And that was a bi-weekly section of the News Hour where the former council member would speak to what was coming up in council agendas and how folks could participate. And he asked me on the first week of December to consider coming and speaking in public comment. that we had a deep need for affordable housing investment in our community, but it seemed as if no one wanted affordable housing built in their neighborhood. And he was hearing a lot of opposition to affordable housing, but not from folks who had the need. So he invited me to speak in public comment. So on December 9th, 2014, I showed up to that meeting and advocated for affordable housing. And seeing the lack of working class and poor folks in the city council chambers, I said, I think we should start showing up to these meetings while decisions are being made about us without us. And so I made a commitment to start attending city council meetings. And now I've only missed 3 since that date on December 9th, 2014. And it became clear to me as we got more and more folks showing up around the budget plans and policies that we needed working class, poor, and compassionate people needed that voice on council when they couldn't be in the room. So I accepted the invitation from my neighbors for their support for me to run in 2017. I was unsuccessful in my first attempt running for city council, but we gained a seat on council in 2020 during a pandemic, which for anyone who is has been moving from an in-person work to a virtual work, it definitely complicates things. It's very isolating to be in the Zoom square. And it can feel like, though, I definitely know that the community is with me on certain issues. It's hard to gain that deeper understanding and gauge the temperature in the room. So I'm glad that we're back to in-person meetings. But I've also learned a lot as a city council member about the importance of having those hybrid functions so that we can reduce barriers to participation by having virtual elements to public engagement as well.
Now, you also served on some boards and commissions, did you not? Can you talk about that?
I did. So for the past 14 years, our family has made a very intentional effort to reduce our vehicle miles traveled. So reducing our dependency on fossil fuel. We mostly walk, bike, and ride the bus, occasionally carpooling or borrowing a car when we have to meet needs for our family or to travel to visit family members. So using that experience, I did volunteer on the Multimodal Transportation Commission for 4 years, as well as the Transit Committee. And through that experience, gained some knowledge on how operations work in City Hall, the processes for our budget plans and policies, ways to advise council from a volunteer aspect, which is why, as a council member, I have that added value and understanding that when our boards and commission members are bringing their professional and lived experience to the table around issues with the tree canopy, multimodal transportation, the Human Relations Commission addressing human rights issues, those are opportunities to cover topics more in depth and to have more public engagement and to have a more professional analysis of the details of the issue before it comes to council. It's a tremendous benefit for me as a council member to be able to have additional information on those decisions. But I also appreciate how it's a way to enhance participatory democracy so that we can share in the work and the responsibilities and the successes together as a community.
Well, that question is going to come up later because obviously you're aware that there's a proposal to severely reduce the number of boards and commissions, and obviously you're not a fan of that, but maybe we could speak about what you do think should be done about boards and commissions, if anything at all, later when we get to some more of my process questions. But getting back to your background, so you've been on the city council for a couple of years now. What would you say are your proudest accomplishments?
So in my second year on council, I've served on the governance committee, the boards and commissions committee, and the public safety committee. And I've also been a liaison to multiple advisory boards, so Multimodal Transportation Commission, Urban Forestry Commission, Homelessness Initiative Advisory Committee. And proudest accomplishment, no one person can do the work that needs to be done alone. And so I think one of the best examples of seeing council and staff and community to come together around an issue for shared successes is the purchase of the Talbert lot next to the transit center using our bond funds. So when that decision came forward to council, we had an opportunity to do some cascading of funds. I suggested instead of using general funds or housing funds to purchase this lot, why don't we use our most restricted funds, the housing bond dollars that have a specific deadline that we need to meet? We made commitments to the community that we were going to use those bond dollars to address transportation and housing. And in this situation, we're doing both. So we're maximizing the commitments we made with our bond promises, and we have a future to build deeply affordable housing right next door to transit while expanding transit, because we can't do that extension into the county or more bus service until we have more capacity with transit. And because we used that cascading of funds and pulled it from other resources, it freed up the funds from the sale of White Labs, which always should have been earmarked for reparations funding. And indeed we were able to move that fund. So I'm really thankful that my colleagues and city staff worked with me to find that cascading option so that we could achieve that success together. Those are the kinds of decisions and collaborative work the public should expect of us more often.
Well, that sounds very good. Now you're now running for mayor. So I know I've been watching you in public forums. You're extremely positive. You're not doing any negative campaigning. But obviously, the fact that you want to go from being just a member of the city council to being the mayor means that you must have some issues with the way that the current mayor is being the mayor. So however you want to phrase it, maybe what you might be doing differently or whatever verbiage you want to use with staying positive, tell me how you think, or I should say, tell me why you want to be mayor and what you would do differently than the current mayor.
So as I mentioned, serving in public office during a pandemic and during crisis moments in our community is very challenging. So I'm holding gratitude for the service of our current mayor. And I am endorsed by former Mayor Lenny Sidnick. And I've talked to the former Mayor Lenny Sidnick about the work that she had to do to bring meetings that were happening behind the scenes into the public for that shared accountability, shared responsibility, and shared successes. And that is the fundamental difference in what I think should be happening in the mayor's office right now. So I'm committed to an open meetings policy, removing barriers to participation while securing participatory democracy, ensuring that folks in the public can access information, access documents in advance, so that we're not getting information at the last minute and then expected to, well, let's be honest. When I hear public comment a lot of times as a council member, I'm hearing more public comment with concerns around the process than I am around the issue. So I think that shows us that we have a lack of trust. So if we have an open meetings policy, some of the things I'm committed to doing within the role of the mayor's office are setting an agenda that, maybe it's not an issue isn't going to have a majority of council support, but it is a matter that needs to be discussed in public so that folks can see why these kinds of decisions aren't getting through at the council level. I'm committed to ending the check-in process. Right now, we have, just this morning, 2 council members and the mayor meet with fully staffed meeting with an agenda and attached documents to prepare the next meeting or the next 2 or 3 meetings. It's never a quorum of council. It's always a quorum of a subcommittee of council. And my concern is that if we're trying to gain information to make more informed decisions, the public would benefit from that as well. And also, the county commission already does this. So we already have a model in our community of a pre-meeting of a public body where they're setting the agenda for the next 1, 2, 3 meetings so that the media and the public can discern what's about to happen and help us make those informed decisions and just put more sunshine on the process. Those are some of the key differences in how I think that the process should be more public.
So I've been hearing a general criticism, maybe the general criticism of the current mayor is that she's an attorney for developers, and therefore what the council does is too favorable to real estate developers. Would you share in that concern?
In general, I am really tired of selling out our community to an over-reliance on tourism. We are watching as the over-reliance on tourism burdens our infrastructure, displaces our vulnerable neighbors, and extracts our natural resources. Having worked minimum wage jobs in the hotel industry and also management jobs in the hotel industry, I've seen folks spend their whole day's wages just to get a cab home because the transit service that they got to work didn't get them home. 30% of our bus routes end at or before 7:30 here in Asheville. So when I see us selling out to tourism and then not getting enough of our hotel occupancy taxes to offset the tremendous cost of tourism, I'm just like at a loss as to, I know that there's state legislation that supports and limits what we can do with the TDA and the hotel occupancy taxes. But when we come to the negotiation table with the bare minimum, we're not going to get caught up on being so far behind on our infrastructure needs. So at the governance committee this last month, we set forward a legislative agenda. And in that legislative agenda is a request for the North Carolina General Assembly to change our legislation for the hotel occupancy taxes. Instead of just saying a more equitable split, I asked my colleagues to name explicitly that it has to be at or beyond 50%. Our hotel occupancy taxes last year were at 27 million. This year, they're expected to be beyond $40 million. So I think that if we can't ask our neighbors in the TDA and the county commission to go beyond what the state allows at 30%, then we are going to have to do something more drastic, like end and completely restructure the TDA. It is the only responsible solution I see. And though it is not in the power of my office to, like the county has the power to stop collecting the occupancy tax, or the state legislator has the opportunity to change the language of the occupancy tax, it is my responsibility to use the privilege and the power of my office to leverage on behalf of the people who live and work here. And so I'm committed to doing that.
Okay, well, related to that, the issue of whether Asheville works for working people or not, whether Asheville works for the people who live in Asheville or not, are the kinds of developments that are being approved. So aside from the tourism industry, would you say that there are too many developments being approved that do not benefit the residents and the working people? And as a corollary to that question, if you become mayor, you're obviously going to want to have a majority of the council that thinks the way you do. And I would say that some of the candidates I've been interviewing think the way that you do. So would you endorse any candidates, putting you on the spot here, so that if you win your race for mayor, you will be able to have a majority and get some of these things done?
I am very thankful for the opportunity to talk about that. I am one part of a body of council. And so no one person can get this work done alone. It is going to take a majority if we are going to see a budget, plans, and policies that align with our community values, benefiting the people and planet instead of an over-reliance on tourism and for-profit development run amok. So there are some things that we could ask council to do now to not wait until the next council. Among the things I've offered as a council member are lifting up CoThink and other organizations' requests for an outside equity audit of our budget plans and policies. To operationalize equity might look like having an equity analysis and a sustainability analysis in every single staff report. Right now, staff reports, when we're making a decision on council, include a financial impact and some pros and cons. But if we're not measuring the equity impact and sustainability impact, then we're missing an opportunity to collect more data on our decisions and then analyze them afterwards, but also to look at the long-term impact of not doing the right thing when we're just looking at the upfront cost. So I just want to point out that there are some things we don't have to wait on. We can be doing operationalizing equity today. You also put me on the spot to ask about endorsements. I think it's really important at this point in our election process to look at who's running on what issues and what people care about so that we can hold them accountable to it. If I lift up during the primary which candidates that I think would be the most in line with helping us advance progressive policies, then the community won't be holding those candidates accountable themselves. So I would encourage you to pick up the 411 guide from the League of Women Voters, the Mountain Express questionnaires, look at endorsements like the Western North Carolina CLC, the Central Labor Council, which I'm endorsed by, as well as Equality and C, and look at those questionnaires, see what the candidates are committing to us that they are going to do. And that is the most important way to hold candidates accountable.
Well, that was a very political answer. And I might have answered it the same way if I was in your position. But I guess people know who I'm interviewing, and therefore they can also watch my shows and see what those candidates have to say. They're all on my YouTube channel. Now, getting back to development, there was just something in the paper today. Well, actually, it was in Facebook. Parker Sloan, who is on the Buncombe County Commissioners, posted something about the Ingalls, because this is coming up for a vote. It just passed its hurdle in a commission, and now it's going to the full city council. And he was saying, why are we replacing one suburban big box store with another suburban big box store? He used the words bad, unsafe, low density, car centric. And I want to know your opinion on that. I know you've often cast the lone dissenting vote in some of these development issues. What is your opinion on that, Ingalls?
Well, step number one, let's look at the whole process and how we keep getting the kinds of development that our community doesn't need. We do need more density and housing on transit corridors. And what are the things that got in the way? If we had a community benefits table for commercial, residential, and mixed-use development, then we would be able to see, are homes and businesses being displaced? Is this resulting in a net loss of affordability? What are the benefits? Are we going to see renewable energy sources? Are we going to see mitigation of stormwater, repair of our tree canopy? Are minority women-owned businesses contracted for development? Is there deep affordability, permanent affordability? Are the businesses going to pay living wages? Those are the kinds of community benefits that we should be applying to every single development in a measurable way. And I think that would provide more consistent outcomes and another opportunity for accountability of council. Now, for this specific, when we're looking at those urban center designs and making sure that when we already have dense transit corridors, like what this one is along Patton Avenue, how can we ensure that there's housing layered in so that people can live close to where there's access to groceries and jobs and education opportunities? We did receive pushback from legacy neighborhoods. We have the historic Burton Street on the other side of Patton, which was split up by this corridor. We have the Emma community on the back side, and there are concerns about the ripple effect of gentrification. Now, should neighborhoods that have historically been divested from not be invested in because it will make them more desirable and make property taxes go up and push people out? No, we have to find a way to listen to community and what anti-gentrification measures look like and then implement them. Listening means following up with action. So I would give an example. On the other side of the street of this, the Burton Street community has advocated for the Smith Mill Creek Greenway. This would help to reconnect the Burton Street community from West Asheville safely for all modes of transportation back to downtown. And that reconnection is a significant investment to repair damage already done through urban renewal and redlining, through displacement, through gentrification, through the disproportionate impact of property taxes. And with that, our request to support economic development in the community, to support the community garden, to support land trust, to support homeowners being able to fix their homes so they can reinvest and build equity in their homes for their family. If those kinds of anti-gentrification measures are layered in, then it offsets the impact of a new greenway that can increase the property value in that neighborhood and make it harder for people to stay. So that tells me that there are solutions, community-led solutions, that should be heard and implemented. Those kinds of similar threads are what we're hearing from the Emma community: opportunities to support cooperative land ownership models, cooperative economic ownership models, to get in advance of the gentrification that is coming, because that corridor will change. We missed opportunities along the way to layer in the anti-gentrification measures, and we missed an incredible opportunity in this. And I'm so glad we're talking about the county commission, because one of the core elements of our Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan, responsible regionalism. Asheville cannot carry the burden of responsible regionalism alone. The county is currently working on a comprehensive plan. I would love to see a Buncombe-Asheville transit system where we are connecting folks along transit corridors, preventing sprawl, addressing gentrification, investing in neighborhoods that have historically been divested from. We're going to need to do that together. Coordinated efforts are possible. We need a feasibility study out of Buncombe County working with the city of Asheville to make transit work as a core so that we can expand it into regional transportation. Those are the kinds of things that we could be doing instead of finger pointing and blaming for the obvious mistakes that we have right now, because we're super far behind in our infrastructure and our planning. But I'm not sure that this kind of obvious missed opportunity isn't going to keep happening if we don't see some significant action from the county on the comprehensive plan. As a person who lives in Asheville, I also live in Buncombe County, and I pay Buncombe County taxes. So I really hope that your listeners today and my friends and neighbors will engage the county commission as much as they engage the city of Asheville to hold the Buncombe County Commission to equity and sustainability in its comprehensive plan. That is all of our responsibility, and I'm committed to doing that with you.
Well, according to the article that Parker posted, there were only 2 people that bothered to come to public comment, and neither were opposed. And it looks as if there's no housing in there. So are you saying that it's too late at this point and you're just going to vote against it? Or is it not too late to try to work with Ingalls and get more of what we want in there?
Working for community benefits in advance of a vote is I would hope that it's never too late. But I also would like to name that it has been an incredible struggle to shift the narrative of affordability being from 80% AMI, area median income, to what is actually deeply needed, which is 60% AMI, area median income. Now we're talking about the difference. When you hear affordability at 80% of area median income, that's for people making $20 an hour. We need housing for people making $10 to $15 an hour. So once again, if in those moments where I've pushed really hard on council around affordability to make sure that when that apartments are layered in, that we get permanent affordability or cooperative ownership models, or work with the land trust to own some of the units, if it's not all of those things or some of those things, then it's got to be truly affordable for the people who have the greatest need in Asheville. So yeah, it's a huge missed opportunity. We should not be replacing a big box store with another big box store. And we also, it ain't over till it's over.
Okay, well, affordable housing is a particular interest of mine, and I've long believed that incentivizing developers to provide affordable housing is not working. It's very clear that it's not working. And affordable housing should be a right, not a privilege, just like healthcare. And putting it in the for-profit sector is a big mistake. So I believe in public housing, or the term social housing, which is different than the public housing that we all know about, which is just low-income people in these big alienating buildings, which are rife for drug use and crime, but more mixed-use housing with retail, mixed income, mixed use, community gardens, the whole 9 yards. You need big money to do that. and there is some money coming in through these ARPA funds. And I imagine that it could be used for affordable housing, but I've also noticed that the city loves to say, we're not in the business of building housing. We're not in the business of providing services to the homeless. They like to farm stuff out. And it seems to me that there are cities in this country that are taking on this responsibility. They just have to have the political will. What is your feeling about the city actually building and running affordable housing? And then we'll segue into homeless permanent supportive housing.
Well, I want to challenge the thinking that it takes big money to build resilient neighborhoods. The Emma community and Poder Emma are exact examples of the fact that it does not. They are building affordable housing, affordable in perpetuity, equity building with community gardens, supporting each other as neighborhood does. And so that's one of the reasons why we were having that conversation earlier about the Patton Avenue project, right? Another example, the beloved tiny home village. They're building a neighborhood from scratch, and they're building it with partnerships. So when I say that affordability for me means deeply affordable housing with creative and cooperative solutions, it's not because I'm making it up out of thin air. It's happening in our community. Other examples include the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust, which is one of the best tools that is seen not only across the country, but also here in North Carolina for ways to get land out of the speculative market and to make it owned by the community, for the community, in perpetuity. I think that's a tremendous asset in our community. It's only possible because the community members who founded the land trust and continue to operate the land trust are doing that work still today. So if they were massively supported, we would have much better success. Another example, Haywood Street Congregation worked together through a new nonprofit arm, working with partners. The city was one of them, the county, Dogwood Health Trust, to build deeply affordable units for folks making $10 to $15 an hour. We got a lot of pushback about that. And it's like 0.3 of a mile from a bus stop, 1/2 of a mile from a grocery store, and walkable and bikeable. And so once again, we're having these situations where we do have solutions, and that doesn't necessarily mean breaking the bank, but we're just not doing it at the scale that we should be doing it yet. I also hear concerns that we're throwing these incentives at for-profit developers and not getting what we deeply need. I know I'm among the council members who have concerns that our current incentive process is incentivizing the housing that we don't need. I don't want to see us end up like other cities across the country. A lot of folks look to California, but I would look a little bit closer at Athens, Georgia. And the conversation that their commissioners are having is like, how many 80% AMI, $20 an hour units can we just keep building while we have folks in such need and it's not serving them? So it may mean retooling our policies around land use incentive grants. We have a lot of work to do in this community, and we also have really resourceful neighbors. So I think what it's going to take is those partners coming together, but also showing up at the polls for people who are committed to creative and cooperative solutions and not just lining the pockets of developers. Something like a community benefits table and adding those operationalized equity and sustainability analysis in staff reports are some of the tools that I would suggest could get us closer to the outcomes we need.
Now, what about the NIMBYs? Because you mentioned before a mayor that you had spoken to who said that the neighbors had problems with some of this affordable housing. And we just saw an example here in East Asheville with the neighbors having a problem with turning the Ramada Inn into an emergency shelter. And they activated, and I have great respect for how they managed to advocate for their position, because I don't think the other side did as well. And what everybody thought was in the bag, that thing would be turned into an emergency shelter, was voted down. And I would say it was because of political pressure. Would you agree or disagree with that characterization?
Well, for me, I'll just own that I feel as a council member that we dropped the ball on the emergency shelter at multiple points, but it doesn't mean that we don't still need it. We have gaps in service and what's happening with our homeless services, and the people that we failed include the residential neighbors, the business neighbors, and neighbors experiencing homelessness, because we didn't fully commit to an emergency shelter, and we learned a lot of things through this. Um, I, we spent millions of dollars on hotel rooms, and so we essentially paid a hotel to temporarily house neighbors experiencing homelessness without providing all of the wraparound services we needed, though we did have partners for some, and that was sorely needed, and I'm very grateful for it. But now we have nothing to show for it. This is why I've advocated for, instead of unmanaged camping, which we have right now, is a managed camping facility, so that we can provide the services that are needed to have human dignity around, just like bathrooms and sanitation, to get us from where we are to where we're going. So we do still need an emergency shelter. You asked about Nimbyism. It is possible that by continuing to have conversations in private that should have been had in public, that we are actually adding to the conflict in our community, not articulating the needs and the community benefits, and we're making it worse. We're exacerbating a public health crisis instead of addressing it. And I'm among the neighbors that are upset about how this is going, but I'm committed to staying faithful to the work and getting the work done and making spaces at the table for folks to join in the conversation. We're not going to be able to address everyone's concerns, but I do think we can do a lot better than what we're doing right now.
Well, I don't know. I think they had a couple of public meetings that these people attended. They were on Zoom, of course, and I listened in on one. And I don't know that any solution short of not having it there would have satisfied them. I took my son's pants to a local, now I'm in the county, I'm in Fairview, and I went all the way out to Garin Creek to have his pants hemmed up because where I came from, the local dry cleaners did the hemming. So they don't have that here. So I just put in my local I Love Fairview group. Does anyone recommend someone to hem some pants? And this woman, and I drove all the way out there. And she literally told me that, with all seriousness, that they are busing in homeless people into Asheville, that other cities are busing in homeless people. Now, you just referred to homeless people as our unhoused neighbors, which is how I usually refer to them. Do you have any proof, or does the city have any proof that, the people that are homeless in Asheville are locals, so that we can dispel this myth or whatever that they're being bussed in here?
So step number one, at our council meeting next week, we will be looking at the point in time count, and we will have a staff report from the manager's office and from our staff around housing to look at the point in time count to get some of that data analysis. Now, my understanding is that we don't yet have the ability to compare that data around the country to see what other cities are dealing with. And I'm unsurprised that we would have folks who come to Asheville because we spend over $20 million a year on advertising right now. Some folks come to Asheville with $700,000 to buy a house. Some folks come to the mountains of Western North Carolina to spend $700 a day on vacation. And some people are left and pushed out and may come for our health and human services with only $7 in a tent. So long as we continue to spend $20 million a year advertising for people to come to Asheville, I feel it is our responsibility to take care of them, but also to take care of the people who live and work here. This is why the impact of the tourism industry, both on the advertising arm of it and the impact of the infrastructure, including our affordable housing and our natural resources, is just untenable and unacceptable that we cannot get a greater split. I don't see how we keep advertising at this level. It's a shame.
So you don't think there's any truth to what they believe, which is, oh, they're so provided for here, with groups like Be Loved, who, by the way, I was the sponsor of their fundraiser the other night, providing food, providing tents, providing everything they need, so why wouldn't they come to Asheville? You don't think there's any truth to that?
Well, there's going to be climate migration here. We're one of the safest places to be. We have, safe drinking water. We have like moderate temperatures. we are going to deal with climate migration. We're already dealing with climate migration. But I do think it would be, there are concerns. We do need to look at the point in time count. We need to ground in data and narrative data. And also we need to tell the whole story, that it's not just people coming here with the most need. It's also people who've been displaced by an over-reliance on tourism and for-profit development. These are our neighbors, whether they got here yesterday, 10 years ago, or they were born, raised here, whether or not they have $700,000 or $7 in the tent.
Let's talk about Airbnb, because that relates to tourism and affordable housing. And I brought up something at a meet and greet, which was, I don't know, I think it was 8,000 homes that are 84% of them are rented the entire home. And so when you take that sort of long-term rental stock out of the market to turn it into Airbnb, it's no wonder that rents have risen 25% this year. North Carolina is, Dillon's rule state. You can't have rent control here if you wanted to, like in some other cities. We already talked about some ways that you could provide public housing with land trusts and nonprofits and whatnot. How do you think, what are some of the solutions that you can do on a city level to address the affordability? If you can't raise the minimum wage, if you can't have rent control, what about providing free childcare to people? This is an idea that I've been pushing, because obviously childcare is one of the reasons that women can't work, because if they're going to spend more for their childcare than they're going to make in their job. So if we had, say, universal pre-K, this is something that the city council member in Beverly Hills is going to propose, that the city provide pre-K to every single resident and every single person who works in that city. Would that be a feasible idea for Asheville?
So I just want to make sure I got this. Short-term rentals, the nuances of short-term rentals, how they impact the cost of living, and ADUs, and pre-K, and water. So I'm going to start with short-term rentals. We are not a Dillon's rule state so much as we are a Mother May I state. An example of this is a story I'll just tell, that my nephews love Pepsi so much. They drink like so many Pepsis every day. But I'm not going to buy Pepsis when they come to visit. So the first time they came to visit, I said, I'll buy you a Pepsi if you can find it in this health food store. And they ran every single aisle looking for a Pepsi, and they couldn't find one. And they're like, what kind of store is this that doesn't have a Pepsi? So you can get things done in North Carolina if it already exists in the legislation, or if there's case law for it. So if you can't find it in case law or in the General Assembly's legislation, then it's not going to happen. You have to get the special permission. So when it comes to short-term rentals, I just want to name that there are small business owners renting out a room in their homes, what you have previously called that homestay permits, to offset the high cost of living, the rising property taxes, and as their business model. I understand that. Like, I'm running a small business out of the second room in my house as a music educator. So I appreciate that there are folks using this to address the high cost of living, and it makes their housing more affordable. However, we've got way out of control with the number of whole home rentals, and that includes apartments. When we think whole homes, I'm not just talking about a house with a yard in a neighborhood. That's happening too. But it also makes it really hard to convince neighborhoods that we should have density along transit corridors when we know that it's not going to be enforced against short-term rentals, and we're essentially incentivizing a lodging use in their neighborhood. We missed an opportunity to enforce those at the platform level this year. And now that case law that I mentioned earlier with the Mother May I state issue came up on the coast. And so we can't regulate short-term rentals at all. So now we're having to scramble to look for another way to make sure that we don't just become another beachfront community where every single place that could be affordable housing becomes lodging use. We just cannot compete. And our working class is going to get pushed further and further out. So we are looking at ways that we can mitigate the impact of that new case law. It will be detrimental to affordable housing and to economic development, because businesses aren't going to be able to find workers because they aren't going to be able to afford to live here. You mentioned other ways that we could address affordability, but I wonder if we should just talk about the fact that there is a little bit of a difference between the city and the county, in the sense that up until recently, the city's role for education was appointing the Board of Education. We have our first historic elected Board of Education for the Asheville City Schools District happening. It's on the ballot this year. So that's a really big deal. It's totally new. I hope folks are paying attention to the candidates that are running for the Board of Education. Pre-K, I do support the work that the County Commission is doing around pre-K and ensuring that families have access to early childhood education. It'll be a tremendous impact on our opportunity gap. We have one of the highest opportunity gaps in the country and in the state for our Black students. It is among the many, many, many reasons why we should have universal pre-K in Buncombe County, and I appreciate the work going towards it. We took a step back by losing the classrooms for pre-K at Asheville Primary School this year. So we're going to have to get creative and work on funding and partnerships to make sure that we don't lose more pre-K rooms and that we are actually expanding that, taking a step back. Some other ways that we can address affordability in the city of Asheville is water. The reason I voted against the fees and charges increases this year is because right now, commercial water rates are significantly less than residential water rates. And I understand that you would have a bulk discount, but I wonder if in Buncombe County and in Asheville, if that is the best idea right now because of the amount of the water being used for our hotel industry and our other industries that are exporting our water. And so my ask is that we see if we can put the burden of our water infrastructure on our commercial residents instead of making it the majority of it fall on our residential residents right now. And lastly, I'll just say that we have 9 food deserts in city limits. In these 9 food deserts, there used to be Black-owned grocery stores. So I'm really eager for us to pay attention to, listen, and plan to act on what the Reparations Commission recommendations are. Those 5 areas that we asked for the Reparations Commission to focus on include education, economic development, health, housing, and criminal justice. And so a lot of what is possible if we get serious about reparations and addressing the previous harms of our community will address some of these issues. But we're going to have to show up in our budget plans and policies to make sure that work gets done, because just listening, taking a list of to-dos, and then putting on the shelf with no intention to actually do something about it is something that Asheville is really good at, and we can't afford to do it on this one.
I want to talk about 2 big issues in the time that we have left. And the first is public safety. And I want to lead into that by going back to the homeless issue. So many of our unhoused neighbors are either mentally ill or they suffer substance use disorder. And the jails, not just in Buncombe County, but across the nation, have become the largest housers of the mentally ill, many of whom are also substance abuse users, because we don't have enough mental health facilities. Reagan deinstitutionalized the mental hospitals in the 80s. The hope was that there would be halfway houses in our community. That didn't happen because of Nimbyism, because they were afraid of the mentally ill. They thought the mentally ill were dangerous, similar to how people feel the homeless are dangerous, even though the homeless are more likely to be victims of crimes rather than perpetrators of them. So, and this kind of plays in with what's happening in the jail. I attended the DA's debate and the sheriff's debate the other night, and there were 15 deaths in the jail. And they were basically saying they don't have the proper, that these people might have died if they, or would not have died if they were in Mission Hospital, because they don't have the proper personnel. Now, I know this is a county question, so maybe I shouldn't even be asking it of you, but it does relate to the homeless, because the whole idea of permanent supportive housing, which the Ramada Inn will be now, although there are delays, and they did come back for more money, and I know you didn't vote for that, and we don't really have time to get into that, but I guess we could have saw that coming. But if there aren't enough mental health professionals, and there aren't nationwide, to provide the services that people need, essentially people could use an entire case manager devoted just to them, but we don't have enough social workers to handle all the, the foster kids in the system. We just don't have enough personnel. What is your thinking about how we can address these issues of mental illness and substance use disorder on the city level?
Okay, so for public safety, I serve on the Public Safety Committee, and I've been attending Public Safety Committee meetings for a while and followed the budget process really closely. We, with the Great Resignation, are seeing a lot of folks demanding better wages, but also better working conditions. And so we are having to compete for employees and for staff. I'll just start with my main concern is that if we do business as usual right now, which only serves a part of the population, not everyone equitably, then we are planning for vacancies. Right now, we have so many vacancies in our public safety staffing that we're just straight up not answering the calls. We ended up in the New York Times for a list of calls that we are just simply not going to answer. And so I don't want to show up with just the problem. I want to show up with a solution. And the good news is, for all the wishing in the world that we had a way to diversify our public safety response, it's already here. It's already being done in Asheville and Buncombe County. Asheville has an opportunity to learn from the pilot program of the Buncombe County Community Paramedicine. They are no longer a pilot. They are funded by the Buncombe County Commission to address overlapping issues with the opioid crisis, mental health, homelessness response. They're doing it with peer support specialists and training that can provide those medication services that are needed. If someone is not able to access their medication and the place that they need to access their medication isn't open for a couple of days, they are trained and authorized to make sure that person has what they need to get through that gap. So then we're sending the right person with the right tools and training for the issue at hand. This isn't like something we're making up or wishing is possible. It's happening here at our Public Safety Committee meeting in February. We've talked about this a little bit. We had a presentation this past year from the county, Buncombe County Community Paramedicine. Their data right now shows that 80% of the calls they're answering are in Asheville city limits. They're serving downtown and West Asheville. So for me, I'm looking at, we consolidated 911 so we can make sure that we're triaging and sending the right person, but we don't yet have enough of those public safety responders to send. So that's why I have asked, this is the second year in a row, I have asked my colleagues on council, instead of planning for vacancies, do what Durham did, temporarily freeze 10 of those positions to give our city manager and our staff the flexibility to have a pilot program, whether we're going to run it within our own public safety departments or we're going to work with the county to expand funding and partner. But ultimately, our neighbors should have a greater expectation than what we're doing right now. We're not meeting our service obligation. We're not meeting our social obligations. We're not meeting our moral obligations. We're running into resistance to even basic reforms. We're not getting all the data and analysis that we need to make sure that we're providing equitable outcomes. But you also mentioned the jail. It would be irresponsible for me to say the jail is not our responsibility. That's on the sheriff. Criminal legal system is not our responsibility. That involves the judicial system and the DA. When the city plays an outsized role in sending people into this system, right? So acknowledging the city's role, I think that we should be asking for different outcomes. That's why we need an emergency shelter. It's low barrier. We need places for people to be. That'll put our staff in a better position than only having jail as a response. Keeping someone in a cage is very expensive. On the minimum, we're talking $140 a day. That's $4,200 a month. Like, we could be providing a much better, healthier solution for our whole community. And the ripple effect of getting people housed and well and into systems of care is what I mean when I say investing in long-term safety strategies. That's what my neighbors asked during the uprisings of 2020, to commit to investing in long-term safety strategies. I can't do it by myself. I need enough council members working with enough county commissioners, working with a sheriff and a DA that are committed not to just doing things the way that they have been done, because that isn't working for everyone, but to really getting serious about root causes and investing in long-term safety strategies. Whether that's for people who are experiencing homelessness, mental health, for business owners. I know that there are business owners who are like, I don't know who to call, but I need extra help with the situation that's happening right here and right now today. And if we diversified our public safety response, we would be sending the right person. So that's why I need the business community and neighborhoods to reach out and say, hey, we demand better. We expect better. Can we start at 10? Take the couple dozen, 4 dozen of vacancies we have in our public safety departments and just start with 10. And if we get better outcomes out of this, we grow it. If we don't, we try something different. But we do this in the public. We have public engagement. We review the data in an honest, open way so that we can get through these challenging conversations together.
Thanks. I have another question about racial justice, and you alluded to the George Floyd protests. Courtney Booth, who is a public defender running for district attorney, she was on my show. On my show, she said, and also the other night in the DA's debate, she said that she was talking to an officer who works in one of the low-income housing projects. He's supposed to be an example of what's called community policing, and he told her that he was charged with finding drugs and finding guns. And she's like, no, that's not what you're charged with. You're charged with providing public safety. Community policing was supposed to be like the cop on the beat, where you get to know the people and you can try to intervene before trouble happens. Because a recent Pew poll showed that the African-American community's number one concern is the economy, and their number one concern is crime. And we know that most of the murders are, African Americans. So yet the police that are in these places where this is likely to happen, they're afraid of the police. So what do you do about that? How do you address that? Because the Asheville Police Department is a city department.
So these are complex issues, and that's why in my position, it's really important to listen to what the community is saying as the concern, but also the solution. We're not there yet. We have a long ways to go. But what I heard you say multiple times is community policing. And I would just like to acknowledge that one of the decisions council's making right now, that I'm responsible for making right now in our budget, is whether or not we are going to maintain a living wage policy. We're not going to have community policing if our first responders can't afford to live in our community, go to the grocery store together, our kids go to school together. Those are the kinds of built-in accountability metrics that we need in our community. But if all of our staff is living in the county, and what I heard from one staff member was come in to take care of the hippies and the tourists, then we're doing a disservice to everyone. And so that decision is on council right now. Are we going to prioritize making sure that living wages are based on housing and use that to retain and recruit more staff? That to me is one of the biggest ones. Secondarily, I'll say that if we don't get serious about addressing the root causes, then we are only going to focus on responding after incidents happen. We have a responsibility, whether it's to listen to violence interrupter programming, to folks who are doing youth mentorship, who have solutions by and for youth at the table. They're saying, we need community center spaces. Give us the keys to Stevens Lee Rec Center, to the Burton Street Community Center. We know how to run the programming with our youth that will help build relationships and help address root causes. And we're sitting here saying, no? That to me says that we have an opportunity to diversify our public safety response, and we're saying, I'm good. We're so not good, and we could be doing a lot better. If it comes to intimate partner violence and the complexities around that, we are investing some of our ARPA funds in both services and capital improvement, so building new facilities with our partners. We will still need to hear from the public a serious demand for equitable outcomes, because the disproportionate outcomes of crime are impacting our Black and Indigenous neighbors. And so this is exactly why we need the advisory boards to not only be maintained, but also support them so they have teeth, so they have a reason to show up. We could do like Durham is doing and have equity stipends to address barriers to participation so folks can bring their professional and lived experience and be taken seriously. We can do participatory budgeting. It's already being done in Greensboro and Durham so that folks have a say in how we spend our budget. It's literally anything you can build. You can look at what Greensboro and Durham are doing, and they're building sidewalks, they're building community garden infrastructure. The community is saying, we demand solar panels on this community center, and it's happening because participatory budgeting puts people's voices at the table. And there's a real hesitancy, I think, to do it here because it means giving control up. But I think we're going to get a lot farther if we do this work together, even when it's hard. And that's why I'm committed to open meetings policy, not because I can do this work alone, because I'm committed to a process that allows us to work together.
Can you give me 5 more minutes so I can ask you about what I think is most important issue, which is climate crisis? And I'm also going to send you an amazing webinar that I attended the other day about participatory budgeting with youth. This is youth in Rhode Island and in Arizona that were involved with how they were using ARPA money. And it was middle schoolers in one instance. It was amazing. It was amazing. Imagine. So the climate crisis, you referenced climate refugees. I really think I'm a climate refugee, having coming from California with our droughts and running out of water and, the wildfires. I had to pack my car for potential evacuation twice in the last couple of years because the fires were that close. What do you think that, obviously the major solution is with the federal government, and it's distressing how when just the other day, the United Nations Attorney General, the head of the United Nations, whatever his title is, basically said we have 3 years to do something. If we don't get something in motion in 3 years, we're dead. And I believe that. And so I think it's at this point, it's really what big governments can do. And what's happening since the war in Ukraine, we're going in the absolute opposite direction. Some of the things that Biden is talking about doing are horrific. But what we can do in Asheville, things like, requiring that this city buildings energy efficiency, maybe putting solar panels on all the buildings. What are some of your solutions that you think we can do on the city level to help with the climate crisis?
So before I was on council, the previous iteration of council adopted a climate emergency resolution. This was a partnership where multiple organizations and community members came together to inform what that resolution looks like. It is unsurprising to me that the tempo and the timbre of the public comments we're getting around the climate emergency are hot and fast because we are not doing enough. We're not treating it like an emergency. Once again, adding equity and sustainability analysis to every staff report would get us closer to heading in that direction by operationalizing it. But this is another opportunity for us to listen to the most impacted people around. If we just do resource conservation for people who have the most resources already, we are doing a disservice to humanity. We have an opportunity instead to listen and to follow up on the public engagement that is received. The city of Asheville is working on a climate justice initiative. We contracted with Marisol Jimenez of Tepeyac Consulting, who's been working with BIPOC communities to look at, okay, if we know that stormwater mitigation is going to be our #1 issue, it is going to be raining more often, the rain events are going to be more extreme. We already know that. This is scientifically based. Where are the neighborhoods that are in the floodplain? What is the impact on food security? What can we do to better repair the tree canopy? When we look at the data that was provided through the study from Asheville Greenworks on where the heat islands are and where we've lost the most tree canopy, it is in those historic Black neighborhoods and those legacy neighborhoods and housing authority neighborhoods. So we can shore those issues up as we go along, but we need to have the kind of operationalized analysis as we go. Otherwise, we're just going to keep doing business as usual, and it's going to leave the most vulnerable neighbors more vulnerable. And it is incredibly expensive to deal with the climate crisis after it's already happening. We've already seen these intense floods and the fires that happened here in the past few years. We can't just rely on emergency response. We need to get in front of these. So that is why we are going to need a council that's going to support those operationalized results for equitable outcomes. Like, y'all, I cannot do this by myself. I hope y'all pay really close attention to the folks that are running on this issue that are going to prioritize climate justice as part of public safety.
Okay, well, we're out of time. Why don't we tell people where they can find you and how they can volunteer. Well, I don't know how many volunteers you need at this point in the last days, but volunteer or donate or just simply vote for you.
Well, I will say step number one, we need poll greeters. If you go to Kim Roney for Asheville.com, number 4, Asheville.com, you can sign up to volunteer there. And early voting is happening now through May 14th. The primary is coming up on May 17th. You can bring a friend or a neighbor. That will be a big help. But as far as donations, I just want to point out that what we see happening with the Supreme Court right now, access to abortion care, access to reproductive health care, the potential impact on human and civil rights for our LGBTQ community, including folks like myself. As a queer person of faith, born and raised in the South, I am really concerned about what we're seeing happening around the raveling of our human and civil rights. And so today I just want to take the opportunity that if you have some extra dollars to chip in, then I suggest that you donate to the Carolina Abortion Fund.
Well, thank you very much, Kim. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. You're a force of nature, and I do hope you win. So unfortunately, as I mentioned before, I don't live in the city of Asheville, so I can't vote for you, but I'm going to encourage all my friends to. And the other thing that I wanted to tell viewers is my upcoming shows. On Sunday, I'm going to be interviewing Bill Brannion, who's running for county commissioner in District 1 against Al Whitesides. He's a real peace activist, and he's running on an anti-Raytheon platform, pro-peace pretty much. On Tuesday, I'm going to be interviewing one of the organizers from the Boone, North Carolina Starbucks store, which was the first and so far only Starbucks store in North Carolina to vote for a union. And I'm hoping to get a representative from the Asheville effort because their vote in their Charlotte store is going to be on Wednesday. And Wednesday night, I'm interviewing Pepe Acebo and Liza Kelly, who are 2 candidates running for school board. And then I don't know, I think I'm going to be doing a California show about Gavin Newsom going back on his commitment to close the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. So until then, if you've never seen my show before, you can find all of them on my YouTube channel, which is YouTube.com/Lauren from LA. And I'm here on Facebook at Facebook.com/Lauren.Steiner.LA. Please share this show. And again, thanks to my guests. And I'm going to close the show the way I close all my shows, which is a little uncomfortable during this war because it's sort of a war metaphor, but of course I don't mean it that way. But it is, keep fighting.
Thank you, Lauren. Glad to be here with you.